Alright, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII. And today we're really just here to celebrate this game because today, September 7th, is the 25th anniversary of the release of this game in North America. For myself and many, many people out there, this is their favorite game of all time. And for myself, it's always been that way ever since I first played FF7. I instantly fell in love with it. I was never captivated by a game quite like this. I played video games before FF7, but nothing was to this degree in terms of like world building and storytelling. Now, to be perfectly fair, I didn't play a lot of RPGs in general growing up. I don't even know if I played any before FF7. I might have. It's kind of hard to remember that far back. But prior to FF7, my favorite game would have definitely been like Super Mario Bros. 3. I played a lot of NES growing up, played a lot of platformers. And honestly, still to this day, SMB 3 would probably still have to be in my top 10 video games of all time. Because if not for that and a little bit of the original Super Mario Bros., I might not be into gaming. Those games are really what I played a lot growing up and got super captivated by the art of video games. Now, obviously, I didn't play Final Fantasy VII when it first came out. Like I said, I wasn't super into RPGs. That being said, thinking back now, the time frame of things, obviously I would have been playing Pokemon growing up, so I was into RPGs to a certain degree, but nothing quite like this. My oldest memory of Final Fantasy VII is playing it at my brother's friend's house. I remember us over there hanging out with them. They were a little bit older than me, a couple years, but we're sitting around watching them play, and I wanted to play the game. I wanted to start a fresh playthrough, and obviously in hindsight, there's no way I could just sit there and play FF7 because you're not going to get that far in a couple hours. But I always remember the opening segment, the bombing mission, the guard scorpion, the countdown clock, this image right here with inside Reactor 1. Like, I've always remembered this opening segment because it wasn't probably till a couple years later that I actually owned a copy myself and could do the full playthrough of the game. Now again, this is so long ago, it's hard to remember the details. I don't recall where I would have got my first copy of FF7. It's been so long. Blockbuster was the thing back then. That's probably where I bought it from. But once I owned my own copy of FF7, boy did I fucking play. This is back when I was a kid, even like a young teenager, where I could just play games on repeat all the time. Like, I would just finish a full playthrough of a game, and it's like, hey, let's just start another playthrough. And I did that plenty of times with FF7. But to be honest, in a lot of ways, it's kind of the game that kept on giving because there's a decent amount of hidden content, especially for a game back then, that on subsequent playthroughs, you just kind of come across new stuff. As I mentioned on the channel before, I didn't grow up with internet access. I didn't have a guidebook for this game, so I wouldn't know how to look shit up. Even if I had a computer with internet, I don't even know if I would have known that was even a concept that you could look shit up for video games online. So I was completely blown away years later when I learned how much hidden content there actually was in the game once I could actually look stuff up, understood how to do that, etc., because one thing that always confused me was Yuffie. Like, I kept running into this little ninja girl when I played the game. I'd beat the hell out of her. We'd have this strange conversation afterwards, and then she would rob me, and I'd fight her again later on. I couldn't understand the point of it or what exactly was going on. And then to my surprise, I find out that this can be an actual party member if you answer the questions correctly. And I couldn't believe this shit. I was like, this is an entire additional character. I've been playing this game for years at this point. This is an extra character that I've been missing this entire time. That can actually add to the narrative in the story, because if she's in your party, she's in the middle of cutscenes, she'll have unique dialogue, right? But then come to find out, she's actually not the only additional character. There's a second one. There's Vincent Valentine, obviously, in the Shinra Manor, and this one always eluded me just because of the puzzle that was in the Shinra Manor. Now, it's obviously significantly easier than the conversation you have with Yuffie post-beating the shit out of her, but it still was kind of hard for me, at least at that age, especially dial 4, like the fourth number that's like a hidden number or whatever the case. Now, it's kind of obvious looking here at this image, but back then, again, I'm just a young kid. I'd never played a game quite like this, so I don't know to scroll down even more, but it's pretty obvious there's an empty space there. But also, as a kid, I would have been struggling with the safe input combination, since you can't go past the number you're trying to aim for, because if you go past that, it fucks it up, right? But even if I figured all that out and got all of that right, I imagine at that age, unless I was severely overleveled, I probably would have got my ass beat by Lost Number anyway, since he's kind of a complicated fight, at least up to that point in the game. And we could go on and on about all the hidden content and secret stuff in the game, because it wasn't until probably young adult days, probably 10 or so years ago, young 20s and shit like that, where I really dove into this game a lot and kind of did everything the game had to offer. Because, growing up, I just played the game. That's it. It wasn't that I was searching for hidden content, trying to find everything I can, talk to every NPC and all that other shit. I just wanted to play the game. I thought the world was cool, the characters were cool. It wasn't obviously till you're older that you understand the story that they're trying to tell here, because there's a lot of this that's going to go over your head if you're a 7-year-old playing Final Fantasy VII. There's just a lot of stuff you're not going to understand. It was always my favorite game growing up, but it wasn't until I could truly understand the story that it remained my favorite game of all time. And I believe that's what I truly love about Final Fantasy VII, is the characters and the story. We can talk about the other stuff, the materia system, the combat system, the gameplay, the world itself. This is all great shit. But I think ultimately the narrative is what drew me in to love the world of Final Fantasy VII. And even to this day, I'm still fascinated by the story. I love how dark and serious it can get. There's a lot of comedy in the original Final Fantasy VII. But man, when the story needs to get serious, they're not afraid to. Whether that's the death of a beloved character, one's hometown, family, and friends being destroyed, mental illness, suicide, the fate of the planet itself, or even an evil corporation bleeding the planet dry. Again, these are all things I had never seen before in a video game. Hell, prior to FF7, I'm not sure if I ever seen a character die in a video game. The equivalent I would have probably experienced at that point is a Pokemon getting knocked out in battle, or maybe missing a jump with Mario and him falling down a pit. But FF7 was not afraid to show you the death of characters, from the Shinra Building Massacre, to the destruction of Nibelheim, to Sephiroth murdering Aerith, or even the suicide of Dyne. Again, up until this point, playing FF7, I don't know if I'd ever seen a character commit suicide in media, TV shows, movies, anything. That's probably the first time I've ever seen something like that. That might be why the Dyne scene has always stuck with me throughout my life and eventually became my favorite scene in the entire game, just because of how dark and serious it is and depressing. But again, at that age, I'd never seen some shit like this. And then jump forward to now, 25 years later, and FF7 is still going, man. They expanded it. It's no longer that game I played a lot as a kid on repeat that I didn't understand half of the shit that was being told to me. Now there's an entire universe when it comes to Final Fantasy VII, from prequel games to sequel games to prequel movies to a sequel movie, but also a remake of the original Final Fantasy VII that's also sort of a retelling of the story, but also there's new stuff, but also it might actually end up being a sequel to the original Final Fantasy VII, and everything in between, with even more stuff on the horizon. We have Ever Crisis dropping hopefully sometime soon. First Soldier's already out. We have Crisis Core Reunion dropping this winter. We have FF7 Rebirth dropping next winter, which is the second part of the remake trilogy. There's obviously going to be a third part at some point. Like, if you're a Final Fantasy VII fan, we've been eating good for a long time, and there's even more on the horizon. Not everything that's under the FF7 umbrella is astronomical, and everything's comparable to the original FF7. But there's still stuff out there, there's still content out there that adds to the world and the experience of FF7, and I'm a fan of that, dude. A lot of people talk about them milking FF7, and to a certain degree, sure, that's true. It's definitely the most popular IP in the Final Fantasy franchise, right? But as an FF7 fan, I'm kind of fine with that. I want more anyways. I might not be the biggest fan of everything they slapped the Final Fantasy VII logo onto, but at the end of the day, I don't necessarily hate anything that has come out with the FF7 brand. So, I'm kind of fine with what they do until they put out something that's just overwhelmingly bad. Like, they have to go out of their way to make something FF7 related that is just pure dog shit for me to hate it. And so far, that hasn't happened for me, and I'm fine with what they're doing currently and what they're doing going into the future. And we know of a couple projects that are in the future, but there's probably more, right? There's the potential FF7 Netflix anime that may or may not exist, and there's probably more spin-off games and shit coming eventually. So bring it on. I want it all. My dudes, that is going to be pretty much the video. I don't really know what this video is. I just wanted to turn on the mic and start talking. We went into this without any prior anything. I just put on some gameplay and started talking. I just wanted to gush about FF7 since today's the anniversary. Final Fantasy VII is and will continue to be my favorite game of all time. There's been very few games that have ever come within the realm of, maybe me considering, is this still my favorite game of all time? Witcher 3 being one of them. Witcher 3 is definitely my second favorite game of all time. And whenever I first beat that game and its DLC, I sat there and pondered it for a while. I was like, man, is this my favorite game? But, so far, throughout the entirety of my life, all 75 years of my life, nothing's been able to top FF7 for me. And I hope that always remains the same. But my dudes, that's going to be the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you get a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you guys are new to more Final Fantasy VII content. It's been 25 years. Here's to the next 25. Turn on notifications. Follow me to /DYT. I'm a Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description. In the outro. Later, guys. I'm actually going to throw this in here towards the end of the video because it actually should have been in the video a little bit earlier. But obviously, FF7's had a great impact on my life. It's been my favorite game for a very long time. But it's also something I talk about all the time with you guys, right? And now the uploads have been kind of sporadic lately. That's kind of a little bit of a lack of content, but a lack of topics and things to talk about and discussions and shit like that. We've kind of beat the shit out of FF7 Remake. Occasionally there'll be a new theory or a small detail somebody will notice, and there's things to talk about when it comes to Remake. But ultimately, we're just kind of gearing up and waiting for Rebirth, right? Which is still quite a ways away. That's kind of why the uploads have been a little weird lately. But at the end of the day, I really immersed myself into the FF7 community in early 2019. Now, I've been talking about FF7 on the channel off and on since 2015. Since around the time I really started doing my channel, 2015, 2014. Now, the earliest video for FF7 was a rant video. It was me complaining. I wasn't exactly happy with the new direction they're taking my beloved FF7. But obviously, that's changed as time's gone on. I wasn't the biggest fan of it being action combat, of it being split up into multiple games, or what we thought back then was episodic type shit. I wasn't the biggest fan of it back then, but obviously, as time's gone on, we got more and more info for the game, and obviously, I started focusing my channel around it. And through doing that, I've met a lot of cool people, right? We've been doing this pretty actively since early 2019, covering FF7-related stuff. And I've met some of you guys have been here for a couple years now. I talked to a lot of you guys almost on every single video. on social media, etc., etc. It's just nice to have this community to talk about FF7 with, because, growing up, I didn't have a lot of friends that were interested in the same games as me. I was into the Final Fantasy games, and not a lot of my other friends were. I had one friend growing up who was also into a bit of FF7 and like Final Fantasy X and stuff like that, but for the most part, it was me by myself. And even now as an adult, I have even less friends, that I actively hang out with and stuff like that, and even less friends that game in general, mostly just multiplayer games. So it's really like this YouTube channel and like Twitter and stuff where I can talk to FF7 fans is an outlet for me. It's something to talk about, some of the games and stuff that I enjoy that I can't really do in my everyday life. It's really hard to find people that are just as passionate about your hobbies and interests as you are, right? And that's one of the good things about social media. Social media is obviously very bad and toxic in a lot of ways, but it also allows you to find people that have similar interests as you, and it's nice having people that are as passionate about Final Fantasy VII as I am, if not more so. Some of you have been around for a couple years, some of you have been around longer than that, some of you might be newer subs, but at the end of the day, it's nice to have people to talk about this game with. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. Whether we're talking about theories, discussing the game, whether we're breaking down trailers for FF7 Remake or something like that, or even talking about Tifa's tits. It doesn't matter. It's nice to have people to talk about this game with in any capacity. Other than news, that is officially going to be the video. I appreciate you guys watching the content. Later.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain or leave it like Cobain.